Unbroken, the podcast with Madeline Black, healing through storytelling.
Hello and welcome to Unbroken, the podcast with me, Madeline Black, where I am interviewing inspiring people that have overcome adversity and are now making a difference for other people. Today, my guest is Michaela Foster Marsh. Michaela is an acclaimed musician with 3 albums to her credit. Her work has appeared in TV and film. She has been invited to sing at the Monaco International Film Festival, the Cannes International Film Festival, and for Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth. She is the founder and executive director of Starchild Charity, which works primarily with vulnerable women and children. Starchild Charity recently built a school for creative arts in Uganda. In 2017, she was a finalist for Scotswoman of the Year by the Evening Times and has received a Prime Minister's Award for her work in Uganda. Her published memoir is called Starchild, about her life with her adopted brother Frankie and her journey to learn more about Frankie after his tragic death by finding his birth family in Uganda. So welcome, Michaela. Lovely to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Much better for hearing that lovely introduction. That was lovely. Thank you so much.
It's nice to hear back all that you've accomplished. It's amazing.
Sometimes feels like somebody else, but it's nice.
It's all you. Well, because the show is called Unbroken, the first question I always ask everyone is, what does the word unbroken mean to you?
For me, I think being able to heal, transcend and transform.
Yeah.
I think that's the closest I could, and I've had to do that a number of times in my life, so I identify with the title, Unbroken. It's a great title, but for me, I think being able to heal, transcend and transform.
And you've, as we will find out as we speak more, you've had a lot of loss in your life, but you have turned it into something quite beautiful, really. So you were just 18 months old and your parents adopted Frankie.
13 months old. Yeah, 13 months. And yes, they adopted Frankie. Yeah.
Frankie
and
was born in Scotland, but his mum was from Uganda. So you had a black twin brother.
I had a black twin brother, which was highly unusual at that time in 1968. We were pushed along Byres Road in a twin pram, and nobody had ever seen anything like that. They'd never seen transracial adoption, just was literally unheard of then. So it was brave of my parents, I think, at that particular time. If we look at the history, I mean, really what's happening now is mirroring what was happening then. And we had Martin Luther King had just been assassinated in 68. We had the civil rights movement, all the riots that were going on in America, which we thought we would never see again. And here we are.
We haven't come too far, really, have we?
We haven't. So at the time, I mean, my parents didn't set out to adopt a black child. They had set out to adopt a hard to place child, meaning a child that perhaps had a disability or was older, maybe had some behavioural issues. And they were prepared to take that on. And the adoption agency came back and said, we actually have a little black boy here. He's now 13 months old. He's been here since, day one. And he's hard to place. Would you consider a coloured child? And my parents really didn't care about the colour of the child's skin as long as they felt they could bond with the child, which they did. I think it was love at first sight. And he came to stay initially as a foster because of me, because we were the same age. So the adoption agency were very concerned that, there could be territorial issues and I wouldn't be too happy about having to share my space with this other toddler. But there were none. There were no territorial issues.
Reading your memoir, Starchild, it was just a love affair, the two of you. You were just so enamoured with each other. It was just, it was beautiful to read.
Yeah, he definitely, his whole life has shaped my life and his death has shaped my life. I definitely think that there was some kind of divine refined plan to it when Frankie came to stay with us way back then. I can't imagine my life having not had Frankie in it, even although I wish it had been longer.
Yeah, it was really an unusual set of circumstances. Did you ever, as a family or an individual, or Frankie, receive, were you at the hands of racism or misunderstanding, or,
Yes, we
how did you
were.
cope with that?
Frankie was unbelievably charismatic and had great humor, and he did not have a chip on his shoulder. He had much to have a chip on his shoulder about, being black and in a very white society at that particular point. There was hardly any other black people here, and also being adopted. So he did have a rough time of it, but he never allowed that to define him, and he never allowed his colour to define him. And he usually tackled it with a good sense of humour, and also never felt that he'd want them to look past his colour. He never saw that as a barrier. And most of the time it wasn't. I have to say that really he suffered very little racial prejudice in Scotland at that time. There was definitely incidents in our life as we got older. When we were young, it was mostly curiosity. People wanted to pick Frankie up. They wanted to touch him, touch his hair, his skin, because he was so different and so cute and adorable. As we got a bit older, we would go into bars and some people wouldn't serve us. They would just, and we knew it was the colour of Frankie's skin. Most of the time we would just leave. Frankie didn't want trouble.
It's hard to hear that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and I do think Glasgow is a very accepting place, Scotland.
I moved here. I live in Glasgow. We discovered around the corner from each other.
I know, amazing.
So my daughter was 6 months old. She's 27 now. When I moved here from London, I said to my husband, why is it only white people living here? Where are all the black people? Where are all the Asian people? I was shocked coming from multicultural London how white the society was. But as you said, it has changed, but it's still predominantly a white place to live.
Predominantly, yeah. I mean, I think we like to think we're very multicultural and everything, and we are, but I suppose compared to London, it is still quite different. But back then, even more so. Frankie was the only black kid in the school, and in secondary as well, he was the only black kid. And because of that, there was a couple of other, there was another black family not too far from us, and but they weren't at our school, they were at a different school, and Frankie was often arrested for crimes that he didn't commit, and it was the other guy, and the police would just say, well, they all look the same to us. It's ridiculous. But that was
more than ridiculous. It's awful thing to say, isn't it?
It's absolutely disgusting. But so we did, but I mean, there are so many positive stories of anti-racism in Scotland and around the world, and it does frustrate me the media focus so much on the negative and on the severe racism, and so they should, absolutely. I mean, we need to address this. It's been going on for such a long time, but I also feel that I think hopefully the book sheds a bit of light here, that there are really positive stories of anti-racism out there. And many people doing some wonderful things and bringing cultures and things together, that we are, I think, as a collective, being bogged down by so much negative energy and negative stories. And
I totally agree. It's so good to focus on the good stuff.
There are lots of good things.
Frankie was born to a Ugandan mother, but he was never really interested in finding his roots or his visiting his own country or his birth parents. And it was really you who started that journey, which is really what your book is about, discovering a lot of it kind of by accident, his birth family. Can you tell us a little bit about why he wasn't interested, or do you know why?
Yeah, I mean, latterly, towards the end, not long before he died, he that curiosity got the better of him, and he started to become interested. When we were younger, my father sat us down. Having been adopted himself, he was very sensitive to it, and had said to Frankie, and I was included in the conversation, if you want to know anything about your birth family, your African family, there's some information in this folder. We'll do our best to find information. And you know, I felt like I was getting ready, as I say in the book, to hear this fairy story, because I had always wanted to know who Frankie's family were and who his mum was.
You had visions of African princes and
I did.
exotic life, and
yeah, and I think, you know, that goes back to, I think, when the first moment that I actually realised that Frankie was different and was Black. We were in the bathtub together. We were, as many kids were, put in the same bath together, and we were about 5 years of age. And Frankie turned around to Mum and said, "If I scrub really hard, will I become white like Michaela?"
Oh.
And I mean, still, you know, when I was writing that, it did hurt. I still remember that and thinking, even my five-year-old sensitivity was, my goodness, my brother wants to change the color of his skin. I didn't see anything wrong with Frankie's color. It was all I knew. I didn't wake up and say, oh, my brother's different from me. I just accepted that Frankie was my brother. I was told he was my brother and he's my brother, and that's it. And then I suddenly realized that he has a problem with the color of his skin. But my mum, you know, she then went on to kind of explain to Frankie about the melanin in his skin and why he was a different color, and that he'd, you know, his biological family were in Africa, and, you know, she was trying her best to kind of explain this to him and kind of make him accept his color. And that I had my freckles, you know, that I wanted to scrub them off, that, you know, I didn't like my freckles and my red hair. So she was talking to us about, you know, accepting ourselves as we are. And she spoke about Africa. And when she did, I became like, oh my, I wonder who Frankie's mum and dad are. And I became really fascinated by this African country that my brother came from. But the reality was that when we sat down to speak to Frankie, or my dad did, Frankie was just so oddly incurious. They didn't want to know me.
You found that weird, that he didn't want to know. He was quite happy with his Scottish family, and that was that for him.
He was like, I'm Scottish. You're my family. I don't want to know anything about my African family. They didn't want to know me. I don't want to know them. And, you know, and my dad was trying to say, well, you know, there might have been reasons, etc. So defensive and near to tears. And I think that if I think about it now, I think at 10 years of age, which we were then, he was probably scared that he was maybe going to get sent back to a country that he didn't know, or what if they want him back? And he couldn't relate
quite
to
secure where he was.
Yeah. And the thought of this far off country, and some of the images weren't so wonderful on the TV. And I mean, even at 10, we could realize that Idi Amin, there was, you know, a lot of tensions in Uganda. But I think it was more deep than that. I think it was more that whole abandonment, and, you know, maybe I could be given up again and sent back to Africa. I think that a lot of adopted children do have that abandonment issue is huge in them, and never ever really goes away. And I remember even when my dad told us that he was adopted, Frankie said, well, did you do something bad?
So he associated with the child doing something bad, rather than understanding circumstances. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to make these decisions.
Exactly. And Dad was very good and explained that, you know, he hadn't done anything bad, just like Frankie hadn't done anything bad. But again, it's a telling statement, like the statement in the bathtub where he wants to scrub his skin till he's white. So some of these things, obviously, I speak about in more depth in the book.
Yeah, you discovered, sadly, Frankie passed away in a fire in his flat when he was just 27. And the way you describe him, he was so vivacious and he lit up the room and he had this smile and everybody loved him. So such a tragic end, such a, you know, to shorten his life. But you discovered just before his death that he actually had started to look at his heritage, where he had come from.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I didn't think I would ever recover from his death. And it was a long process, and it was 18 years after his death that I actually went to Uganda and found the family. And really that was, I inherited, after my parents had both died, I inherited all the paperwork, and I inherited that same folder that my dad had brought out when we were 10. And
folder that he didn't want anything to do with at that time.
Yeah, and I tentatively opened it, and it was like, I think I called the chapter Pandora's Box.
Yes.
It was like opening Pandora's box, because I became even more curious. I wanted to know even more about this woman. You know, I now had a name, Janet Wivvugira, and my imagination just went crazy. And I tried to do some research on the internet and got nowhere. And you know, like I say, 18 years later, there I was sitting with Frankie's brother, and that story unfolds in the book. I don't want to give it all away how I found them.
But you go to Uganda because you're researching for your novel as well. You're writing a fiction book about Uganda as well.
I mean, I've always been writing from a young age. I guess it was how I dealt with teased out my own sorrows in life. I was journaling, then songwriting, and again, Frankie's death led me into the recording studio. And then when I found the folder, and I kind of came to a dead end as far as finding the family, I started to invent this woman and started to write a fictional novel, very loosely based on this woman that gives up a child for adoption, a black woman, and returns to Uganda, leaving the black child here. But it was a fictional novel. And I had a major agent in London interested in the book, and she said, "I can't believe you have not been to Uganda." And I'd been trying to go for such a long time. And I was beginning to feel that the universe or God or somebody didn't want me to go, but I never gave up. I had that dream in my heart that had been placed there as a young child, I think probably in the bathtub when I was 5. And I knew I was going to go, and I kind of had to surrender to the timing of the universe.
And it took quite a while, didn't it? It was about 18 years or so after.
18 years after Frankie died. But when I actually eventually got there, and it seemed like from that moment when the agent had started to show the interest in the book and everything, that suddenly the gates opened, and I was now being propelled onto this trip to Uganda. And it is absolutely miraculous. It was as if that trip had been planned my entire life. The coincidences, the serendipity, the synchronicities, the miraculous.
I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but the synchronicity was amazing, of the people that you just perchance met that kind of just were linked, all these connections. And also have to say, your writing of Uganda just brought it alive. It was just, I was transported there with you. It was beautiful writing, amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, it was a book I think I needed to write, and I'm glad I did. It had its challenges, obviously, especially writing a memoir, and there's people that are alive today, and they have their own sensitivities about it. I mean, it's Frank and David. I've now got 3 new Ugandan brothers, and I was writing about their mother.
These brothers are the real birth brothers.
They're the real birth brothers, and like I say, when the moment I stepped off that plane, it was just incredible, and I was led to them in what I can only call some kind of divine, miraculous plan.
And sadly, Janet wasn't around anymore, was she?
Janet had died just literally months before Frankie had died. And when Frankie died, I used to say to people that maybe his mum has died and wanted him back. And
this, even I remember reading this part, it gives me goosebumps even to hear you say this. Yeah, how amazing.
And there it was. She died in the October, and he died in February. So I do, and I like to think that they got, you know, that time together, and that they were with me on that journey. I really believe there is a continuous thread that connects us after death.
Love never dies.
It never dies. And having lost all my family at a relatively young age, and most recently my beloved Ronnie, my partner, I know without a shadow of a doubt that they are with us, and that thread continues.
And you journeyed with Ronnie to Uganda, and I don't just mean travel, you journeyed together. You had a huge journey when you were both there. Can you tell us about Starchild, the school? Because it seems that Frankie's brothers wanted to open something in memory of Janet, and you wanted to open something in memory of Frankie, and it happened.
It did, and again, I mean, what are the chances? I mean, a country of 43 million people and I find his family. I mean, the law of probability says that's not going to happen, especially when we'd so little information to go on. And then when we came together, there was just this deep connection to this woman, and she had been a teacher, and they had always felt, you know, it'd be lovely to have been able to do something in memory of their mum, like a school. And then, of course, I come along and I'm saying I would love to do something. I mean, I just felt so overwhelmed by the poverty that I'd seen and the amount of orphans that had been there, and ended up coming back to Scotland. And, you know, again, I talk a lot about how the logistics of setting up the charity and some of the struggles and the challenges involved with that. But the journey really, I felt there was a missing bit in the education with the creative arts, and it was an area that I couldn't have lived without when I was younger, because I was not an academic at school. And so once we were started to commit to building something in memory of Janet and Frankie, I had sort of toured around different schools in Uganda and really got the sense that the children who were not so academically inclined were really being left behind and had very low self-esteem, and there was really no outlet for them creatively at all. So I switched the vision of a school into a creative arts school where we could work with children and give them opportunities for vocational skills and for creative skills. And arts itself is just so healing, and you know, it's so powerful. And
now, don't we? We need music more than ever, I think.
oh yeah, during COVID, we're really starting to see how much the arts mean, and you know, thank God for them.
Have built this amazing school, but what was also really touching was the supplies that you got to schools, that you got in contact with other organizations that helped you get much needed supplies. Can you also explain a little bit about the Taboo Challenge? Because this opened my eyes about young girls that couldn't go to school when they were menstruating because they had nothing to support them during those.
Yeah, I mean, they literally can't go to school. They have to sit at home in the sand, many of them.
No sanitary wear.
There's no sanitary provision at all. I mean, I know that we have period poverty here. I think that's the new name for it. But certainly we do. But in Uganda, this has been ongoing. I mean, the challenges to even get the girl child to school are immense, because the boy child is usually always favoured. So it's difficult enough to get a girl's education there, but they miss their important exams because they have no sanitary provision at all. So, you know, that defines their whole future. Yeah. And most of the girls end up out of school because of the fact that they cannot basically afford basic sanitary provision, or
just go home and sit in the sand while they have their periods.
Yep. So one of the very first projects that we did was to try and provide sanitary care for a couple of schools, so about 400 and odd girls to start with. And Ronnie came up with this wonderful idea of the Taboo Challenge, and making men basically go into the supermarket or Boots or the pharmacies and buy some sanitary care and take a selfie and donate £3, the price of a pack roughly, and then challenge their friend, a male friend, to do the same. So we come up with the Taboo Challenge, and we actually got a couple of guys in Uganda to do it, which is just unheard of. I mean, you know, it's such a taboo to even talk about it there. It's like, you know, the dreaded, really the curse. I mean, it's like, you know, it's just a terrible stigma attached to it for girls, which is terrible. So we broke down quite a lot of barriers there with the Taboo Challenge, and we raised enough money, and we still provide sanitary care to three schools in Uganda, which is completely and utterly life transforming. Something as simple as a pack. What we do now is we work with Makerere University. They produce something called the Maca Pad, which is made with papyrus, and it's very cheap. You know, it's about 50 pence for a pack of 10. And so we distribute those, and we have enough for each year for the school terms. And so those kids don't have to worry, those girls do not have to worry about not being able to go to school or attend exams because of something as natural as their period.
It was so empowering to listen to when you arrived after a bit of a journey and you delivered all these packs, and they have 6 months supply and they're all hoarding them and taking them home, and it was just it actually was a really amazing moment to read in your book.
No, it was an amazing moment to be able to do that and realize something just so small can have such a huge transformative effect on people's lives.
Yeah, but whatever the schools were lacking, somehow you found a way to distribute what they needed. Can you talk about some of the other things that you managed to find for some of the schools?
Just the basics. I mean, even things like pencils and pens and crayons. I mean, obviously we wanted to provide a lot of art materials as well, which we were able to do. But you know, the scholastic material, uniforms, my goodness, I mean, the first thing that we were asked for was school uniforms. And you know, it was the Christmas campaign, and I said, you know, what could we get? And the kids were all like, we want uniforms. I mean, what kid here would want a school uniform for Christmas? But to them, that makes them feel like they belong to a proper school. You know, it gives them that feeling of that they belong to a school and that they're having an education, which is so important. And you know, here it's just so taken for granted, whereas there an education isn't taken for granted and a uniform is not taken for granted. And when these kids got their uniforms, oh my goodness, you would have thought you'd given them, you know, the moon. It was just incredible. And one little girl wrote to me and said, my uniform makes me shine like gold. And for £5, you know, we asked for a £5 donation from people. We did it online. Most of our campaigns have been done on Facebook and social media. And really, it's still to this day a very grassroots organisation where it's a lot of friends of ours and people that have stuck with us over the years. I mean, it's obviously expanding and the book is helping all of that as well. But we've been able to, like I say, build a school for creative arts, run many projects for vulnerable women and children. So yeah, we're now in the process of trying to raise the funds to build a holistic centre for children affected with autism and disabilities. Because in Uganda, in many parts, in the villages in particular, that the stigmas and myths surrounding people with autism and disabilities is frankly horrendous.
Yeah, there's no services for them, and they're
absolutely none. They're locked away. A lot of them, some are chained, tied up, and hidden in the dark, and sometimes left for days.
And it's horrific to think about that, because you call the book Starchild because you believe there is a star in every child.
Yes.
Your story really is one of so many losses, but so many gains as well. And I want to read a little bit that I heard at the end of your book when I was reading it, and it just really touched me. I thank God once again for giving me the gift as my brother. I will never understand why he was taken from us so soon, but I know his legacy is well and truly living on the continent he never knew, with a family he never knew. The whole thing is miraculous. Oh, it gets me every time I read that.
It's getting me. You're reading it to me. It's getting me.
Isn't it? In his death, he's doing so much.
This is the thing about death. It does give us. It gives us an opportunity to transform our own lives.
Yeah.
And we can go either way. And you can very easily fall into victim mode. As you well know yourself, you've experienced, you know, great pain in your own life. Or we can allow it to surrender to some extent and allow that pain to heal, transcend and transform us. To go through. Each grief has given me an opportunity for a metamorphosis. Yeah. And it's like a gateway to an expanded consciousness, if you like. I was always fascinated with the supernal realm, with the spiritual from a young age. I always felt there was more to life than what's here. And I'm not saying that I would rather have not had those losses in my life, but each loss has brought me somehow a bit closer to that realm, if you like.
more evidence, don't you? When you're
I do. I feel
a
there's
lot of
all
evidence.
these cosmic nudges and little signs and symbols and things.
Cosmic nudges. That's a
Yeah,
great way to put it.
I feel them all the time, and I think, I mean, people say to me, "Oh, things like that don't happen to me," and I'll say, "No, it's just because you're not tuning in.
Yeah.
They're
And
happening.
once you do, then you start to see it
Keeps
everywhere,
happening, don't you?
Yeah.
That's when the miracles happen, the miraculous happens, because you start to tune in to more than just the here and now, in a sense. So yeah, each grief, I suppose, has allowed my consciousness to expand, and they've all been very, very different. I mean, grief, yes, it's got its similarities and the pain and that sheer trauma and the grief, and there's been many books written about it, I suppose, but they've all been quite different. And you know, losing a brother from losing a father and a mother, again, at a relatively young age, and then now, most recently, Ronnie. They've all been quite unique and quite different, but the connection with Ronnie, I'm finding very, very strong. Yeah. It's incredible. So yeah, as I speak about in the Starchild book, about that continuous thread connecting us, I'm really feeling it with Ronnie, and I feel that we have an ability to almost co-create with the deceased. If you, I know it's maybe a bit out there for some people to think about it, but I speak to them on a regular basis. I do a lot of prayer, meditation, and really try to believe in that supernal realm or reality, and use it in my life, and it's what helps me in moments of crisis.
Totally get it. My dad has now been 22 years since he passed away, and I have conversations all the time.
Yeah.
I always feel his energy, his presence. He's alive in my children. Yeah, I see and feel him all the time.
Yeah, that energy can't die. It doesn't die.
Exactly. That's why I know that love never dies. That love
never does. It never does. And I just feel grateful that I've had so much love in my life. So yes, I've had grief because I've had tremendous love. But you know, some people don't even get to experience that.
No, that's a beautiful way to look at it. So what is happening with the school now? Because obviously we are recording this during Corona times, so I take it you're not traveling to Uganda at the moment.
I have not. We were supposed to go in July and start to lay the foundation in memory of Ronnie for the Sunflower Sanctuary, which we're, like I say, that's our big project at the moment. But we've not been able to go to Uganda. The Starchild School is not open at the moment because it's not essential. Schools went back last week, and only 6 years, primary 6, primary 7 and 4 year. So they're staggering the children going back. So it's been in lockdown. They went to lockdown 2 weeks before the UK did, back in March. And they have only just started to open the schools up last week. There's been a bit of a spike in COVID just recently. So things are very tenuous. I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest. But sadly, at the moment, we're not able to get back there. And it's been a real struggle. I mean, people talk about children not getting fed here, being out of school. One of the biggest issues there has been feeding the children, because most of them, one of the reasons they come to school is because they get meals, they get fed.
Absolutely.
So it's a real struggle. And also for our secondary school pupils, we have a sponsorship program where we have 25 kids at the moment that we're putting through secondary school. And to be honest, we're really concerned that some of the girls will end up pregnant and not back at school. You know, this is a very big issue. Despite COVID, we really try and work with these girls to educate them about sex, and that many of them, their parents even want them to be married off when they're 13, 14 and not have an education. There is. So I think that we could be up against a lot of challenges in that area. So COVID has had a huge snowball effect. We're well aware of that. And in countries like Uganda, that's what we're also up against, is you know, some of the families have disappeared, have gone off to try and find whatever kind of small work, food, whatever they can. Because things, I mean, there's not the government support at all. So it's been extremely challenging in Uganda.
I realise even though it's restricting for us, how grateful we are actually with what we have.
Yeah, it does put it into perspective. Yeah, it really does.
Just before we end up here, I'd just like to ask you, do you have any tips that you would like to part with our listeners? Anyone that's listening that's maybe struggling with loss, or how you've got to where you are, you know, all these losses, and you're still smiling, still empowering other people, children, young women?
I don't, for me, I think prayer and meditation, and I'm a big Louise Hay fan, the positive affirmations. You know, when it's really hard, sit in front of the mirror and give yourself some positive affirmations. Remind yourself, you know, how good you are. You know, say something positive about yourself until you really
Isn't
do.
it? Because people are really good at picking out the negative stuff.
We're
It's very hard
so,
to focus on the positive. And I think especially in Scotland, I hate to say.
yeah, we're so good at the negative internal dialogue. So it's really important to find a positive dialogue and writing positive things. So for me, yeah, prayer and meditation. I know that's quite difficult for some people, but for me, it's what's helped me get by. I can't imagine not lighting my candles and sitting in the quiet.
Yeah, it's about connecting in, isn't it? And centering yourself.
Yeah, and having a bit of faith and trust in the universe. I mean, like I say, it took me 18 years to get to Uganda.
But if people are listening and they want to read a book about faith and trust and synchronicity, you have to read Starchild, because it just really, like, that your journeys were just so meant to happen. It's just, I loved your book.
Thank you so much.
I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been great to speak to you, and thank you.
And you, thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black, playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black.